This is VOA News via remote. I'm Diane Roberts. Pope Benedict XVI has died at the age of 95. Remembrances and reaction to his death continue to pour in. His death comes 1 decade after becoming the first pontiff since the Middle Ages to resign. Current Pope Francis thanked the conservative German theologian born Joseph Ratzinger for all the good he has done. His body will be displayed starting Monday morning in St. Peter's Basilica to allow the faithful to pay their respects ahead of a solemn but simple funeral, the Vatican said. He will be buried in the papal tombs under St. Peter's Basilica. UN Chief Antonio Guterres praised the former pontiff for his tenacious commitment to nonviolence and peace. U.S. President Joe Biden said the late pope will be remembered as a renowned theologian with a lifetime of devotion to the Church. Cardinal Timothy Dolan was appointed Archbishop of the U.S. state of New York by Pope Benedict. In an AP interview, Cardinal Dolan said it always impressed him how intently Pope Benedict listened to others.
He knew what the Bible teaches, that one can't be a teacher without first being a student. One can't be a teacher without first being a disciple, a student, a listener.
Happy New Year's if you are in Lisbon, Dublin, or London, and many other countries have already rung in the new year. In Times Square in New York, they're ready for the ball to drop in about 4 hours. Security is going to be on point for the event.
At this time, there are no specific credible threats to New York City or any of our events surrounding New Year's Eve.
This is VOA News. In another, actually right about now, Croatia will switch to the euro and enter Europe's passport-free zone. 2 milestone steps for the country since joining the EU nearly a decade ago. Brazil's Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva will assume the presidency Sunday. Sniffer dogs and police searched vehicles in Brasilia of those who showed up at the stadium where he'll be inaugurated. Da Silva faces a long list of hurdles, from healing a deeply divided country to battling poverty and hunger. Deb Haaland, Secretary of the U.S. Department of the Interior, will lead the U.S. delegation. An Afghan lecturer who tore up his academic degrees on a live television show after the Taliban banned university education for women vows to campaign for women's rights, insisting the government order was against Islamic principles. An electrical fault caused a devastating hotel casino fire that killed 26 people, Cambodian authorities say, with many of the bodies found in stairways or trapped in rooms after rescuers failed to reach them in time. Barbara Walters, a pioneer of television news as the first woman news superstar, has died. AP correspondent Norman Hall has the story.
Barbara Walters made headlines herself in 1976 as the first female network news anchor with an unprecedented $1 million annual salary. During more than 3 decades at ABC and before that at NBC, Walters' exclusive interviews with the famous and powerful brought her celebrity status. She frequently asked during interviews, "How do you want to be remembered?" Walters thought of her own legacy.
When women tell me that they entered the field of journalism or went to school to study it because of me, that's my legacy. That makes me very proud. That's lasting.
Barbara Walters was 93. I'm Norman Hall.
As we said at the top of the hour, London is among the cities celebrating 2023. And if you are in Japan, it may have sounded like this. In a sign of returning to normalcy after years of COVID-19 restrictions, thousands gathered at Sensoji Buddhist Temple in Tokyo to welcome in the new year. More than 100 guests were selected to ring the traditional New Year's Eve bell. From Washington via remote, I'm Diane Roberts, VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Pope Francis prayed for his predecessor's passage to heaven as he presided over a special New Year's Day Mass on Sunday in St. Peter's Basilica, a day after Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI died in retirement at the Vatican.
Per tanti fratelli e sorelle colpiti dalla guerra.
The huge basilica will host Benedict's coffin starting on Monday. Thousands of faithful are expected to attend the first of 3 days of viewing. Benedict, 95, died Saturday morning in the Vatican, where he had lived since retirement. He was the first pope in centuries to resign, citing his increasing frailty. The pontiff will lead Benedict's funeral on Thursday in St. Peter's Square. Police in Uganda's capital said on Sunday at least 9 people, including a 10-year-old boy, suffocated to death as crowds rushing to see a New Year's firework display. A witness says people got stuck in a narrow corridor in a shopping mall trying to get back to the concert after the fireworks in a parking lot.
Some people had already reached the parking, so they forced them to come back to the main hall. So that pressure from up and the pressure from down led to loss of breath to some colleagues of ours, which led to their death.
Kampala police said people started pushing through a passage in the Freedom City Mall just after clocks struck midnight. Brazil's President-elect Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva will be sworn in Sunday in the capital, Brasilia, and assume office for the third time. The leftist defeated far-right President Jair Bolsonaro in the October 30th vote by less than 2 percentage points, and his loyal supporters have been loath to accept the loss. Follow us on the VOA mobile app. This is VOA News. Crowds lined the street of London's New Year's Day parade on Sunday to watch performers from around the world celebrate the start of 2023. Marching bands from the U.S. joined bagpipe players from a London Hindu temple to entertain crowds who lined the route. The event started at noon on London's Piccadilly outside the Ritz Hotel, ending a few hours later at Westminster. The first parade took place in 1987. This year, hundreds of performers from the UK and around the world took part in the event, which organizers say reaches a television audience of more than 500,000 annually. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen congratulated Croatia on entering the European Union's control-free Schengen area and the Eurozone on Sunday.
It is the season of new beginnings, the 1st of January, new chapters that are being opened, and there is no place in Europe where it is more true today that it is a season of new beginnings and new chapters than here at the border between Croatia and Slovenia.
Croatia's prime minister said his country was the first to join both the Schengen and the Eurozone in the same day. After midnight on Sunday, police removed signage and a barrier was lifted up for the last time before a placard reading "Free Passage" was erected at a crossing. Croatia joins 22 EU nations as well as Liechtenstein, Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland in Schengen, the world's largest free travel area, seen as one of the main achievements of European integration. More countries are requiring that visitors from China be tested for COVID-19 before boarding a flight or boat. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
Australia and Canada are the latest to join the growing list of countries that are requiring those traveling from China be screened for the coronavirus. That includes passengers from Hong Kong and Macau, who will also have to show a negative COVID test within 2 days of their departure. China's battling a nationwide COVID outbreak after easing restrictions that had led to nationwide protests. The U.S. and a number of other countries already announced mandatory testing, with concerns over China's lack of case reporting and fears that new variants will spread. I'm Jackie Quinn.
Israel's new government will abandon the country's tax on single-use plastic plates and utensils, its new finance minister said on Sunday, despite environmental concerns. Find more on our website, voanews.com. I'm Joe Ramsey. This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Russia's defense ministry said on Monday 63 Russian soldiers had been killed in a Ukrainian New Year's Eve attack on their quarters in the Russian-controlled part of Ukraine's Donetsk province. A defense ministry spokesman said 6 missiles had been fired, of which 4 hit the building, described as a temporary deployment point, while the others were intercepted and destroyed. Earlier, Ukraine's defense ministry said as many as 400 Russians had been killed. Tens of thousands of people paid their respects on Monday to former Pope Benedict XVI at the Vatican at the start of 3 days of lying in state in St. Peter's Basilica before his funeral on Thursday. They began queuing before dawn to view his body, which was transferred early in the morning from the monastery in the Vatican grounds where he died on Saturday, aged 95. Benedict led the Catholic Church for 8 years, until 2013, becoming the first pope in 6 centuries to step down, citing declining health. Thousands of mourners began paying their respects to Pele in a solemn procession past his coffin at a stadium in his hometown of Santos. The Brazilian soccer great died Thursday after a battle with cancer. The 3-time World Cup winner's coffin was placed on the field where he scored some of his best goals. Mourners walked past his casket in the midfield area of the stadium. A Catholic Mass will be celebrated there Tuesday before his burial at a nearby cemetery. Find more on these stories and the podcast Flashpoint Ukraine and Flashpoint Iran on our website, voanews.com, or follow us on the VOA mobile app. This is VOA News. Protesters in Bolivia's farming region of Santa Cruz are blocking highways out of the province, threatening to snarl the domestic transport of grains and food as anger simmers following the arrest of local Governor Luis Camacho. The region is in its 6th day of protests that have seen thousands of people take to the streets and nights of clashes with weaponized fireworks and cars burned. The protests sparked by the December 28th arrest of Camacho over an alleged coup in 2019 are deepening divides between lowland Santa Cruz and the highland, more indigenous political capital La Paz, which have long butted heads over politics and state funds. The U.S. has returned a looted ancient artifact, AP correspondent Rita Foley reports.
It's an ancient wooden coffin, a sarcophagus that dates back to the late dynastic period of ancient Egypt, an era that spanned from 664 B.C. until Alexander the Great's campaign in 332 B.C. It may have belonged to an ancient priest. It had been on display at the Houston Museum of Natural Sciences, but 3 months ago, the Manhattan DA's office determined it had been looted from an area north of Cairo and smuggled into the U.S. in 2008, trafficked by a well-organized network that has done this with other antiquities, says the DA. I'm Rita Foley.
Tram and bus workers in the Tunisian capital staged a strike over delays in salaries and the lack of an end-of-year bonus Monday, creating traffic jams across Tunis. The strike is the latest in a string of similar actions as Tunisia grapples with an economic crisis that has led to frequent shortages of basic goods from petrol to cooking oil. The North African nation is struggling with debts of more than 100% of gross domestic product and is in negotiations with the International Monetary Fund for a nearly $2 billion bailout. Britain's medical bodies on Monday said patients were dying due to inadequate care and urged the government to act as Britain's health service grapples with a winter of crisis of strikes and soaring demand. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine on Sunday said between 300 and 500 patients would die each week in emergency care, notably due to long waiting times. Its vice president stood by the prediction on Monday, rejecting suggestions that short-term factors had caused the crisis after some hospital officials challenged the claim. Find more on these stories on our website, voanews.com. Or for the latest news and information, follow us on the VOA mobile app. I'm Joe Ramsey.